Good day everyone, I am Leociel D. Germino, grade 12 student. I will discuss about the use of theory by John Criswell. So, I begin this chapter by focusing on theory used in a quantitative study. It reviews a definitions of a theory, the use of variables in a quantitative study, the placement of theory in a quantitative study, and the alternative forms it might assume in a written plan. Qualitative inquiries use different terms for theories such as patterns, theoretical lens, or naturalistic generalizations to describe the broader explanations used or developed in their studies. What is theory? Theory is an argument, a discussion, or a rationale. It helps to explain or predict phenomena that occur in the world. Mostly, theory is one of the components of reviewing the literature, is to determine what theories must be used. So, theory may generate the final outcome of study and place it at the end of the study. So, I explore the questions in a scholarly study. In quantitative research, researchers often the theories as an explanations for answers to these questions. In quantitative dissertation, entire sections of a research proposal might be devoted to presenting the theory for the study. In qualitative research, the use of theory is much more varied. So, in other qualitative studies, it comes at the beginning and provides a lens that shapes what is looked at the end of questions asked, such as ethnographics or in advocacy research. Our tagline of the day is that there is nothing more practical than good theory. Now I realize that the word theory scares many people, especially practitioners such as yourself, but as we will see of this chapter, whether we know or not, we actually believe and brave theories. For example, when my brother was usually quiet this morning, I had a theory about it. And a bad theory can be redeemed as guiding, but no theory will make us blind. So far we have thought about a practical problem in a world that you care about, and brainstorm the questions or puzzles that practical problem that might praise. If we interact, we would be at this stage that we might be think about theory. Well, whenever problem, we're thinking about the process that we already have some theory. We already have some into of the study of what's going on. For better and worse, the theory that we have will shape what you do of our research, and it is very very important that we become aware of the assumptions that we have and how you might actually be wrong in those assumptions. So they are the use of theory that I discuss of this chapter this day. The types of variables in a quantitative study. A practical definitions of a quantitative theory. Number 3, a model for writing a theoretical perspective into a quantitative study using a script. 4, types of theories used in qualitative research. 5, options for placing theories in a qualitative study. 6, how to place theoretical lens into a mixed methods only. Here are the types of theory that we discuss about. Quantitative theory use. Variables in a quantitative research. Before discussing quantitative theories, it is important to understand and the verb types that are used in forming theories. A variable refers to characteristics or attribute of an individual or an organization that can be measured or observed that varies among the people or organizations being studied. Also, a variable typically will vary into two or more categories or on continuum of scores, and it can be measured or assessed on a scale. Quantitative research has hypotheses from theory. So, theory is one of the foundation in the quantitative research, which is you work with with theory to write your hypothesis to determine what you think to the relationship or gonna be among variables that you are trusting in your research. So, your task goes of claims in qualitative research. Let's start about the types of variables in a quantitative study. There are the types of variables in the quantitative study. There are temporal order, means one variable precedes another in time. Because of this time ordering, let us say that one variable affects or causes another variable. True a more or accurate statement would be that one variable probably causes another. Then we have also variables. There is an independent variables and dependent variables. Independent variables are those that probably cause, influence, or affect outcomes. They are also called treatment, manipulated, antecedent, or predictor variables. So, dependent variables are those that depend on the dependent variables. They are the outcomes or results of the influence of the independent variables. This is the other names of dependent variables are criterion, outcome, and effect variables. Also, intervening or mediating variables stand between the dependent and dependent variables, and they mediate the effects of the independent variables on the dependent variables. For example, if students do well on a research method test, that result may be due to their study preparations or their organizations of study ideas into a framework that influence the performance on this test. So, the dependent variable of these examples is if students do well on a research method test, and the independent variables is that result may studies ideas into a framework, and also the intervening variables that result may be due to their preparation is this is an independent variables, and their organization studies into a framework. There is an intervening variables that influence their performance on the test. This is an also intervening variables. The mediating variables, the organizations of study, stands between the dependent and dependent variables. There is an mediating variables. So, moderating variables. These are new variables constructed by researchers by taking one variable and multiplying it by another to determine the joint impact of both. Also, these variables is typically found in experiments. They have the two other types of variables. These are control variables and confounding variables. Control variables is a play in an active role in quantitative studies. These are special type of independent variable that researchers measure because they potentially influence the dependent variables. Researchers use statistical procedures to control for these variables. They may be demographic or personal variables, or example is age and gender that need to be controlled so that their influence of the independent variable on the dependent can be measured or observed in a study. Next is the confounding variables. Confounding variables is not actually measured or observed in a study. These variables may have operated to explain the relationship between independent and dependent variables, but they were not or could not be easily assessed. Most of the researchers comment on the influence of confounding variables after the study has been completed because these variables may have operated to explain the relationships between independent and dependent variables, but they were not could or easily assessed because example is discriminatory attitudes. In quantitative research studies, variables are related to answer a research questions. Example is, how does self-esteem influence the information of friendships among the adolescents? Or to make predictions about what the researchers expects the results to show. Those predictions are called hypotheses. Individual positive self-esteem expand the number of friends of adolescents. There is an example of predictions to hypotheses. Next is a practical definitions of a quantitative theory. Definitions of a theory is a set of interrelated constructs. Variables or definitions are propositions that presents a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relationships among variables with the purpose of explaining natural phenomena. In quantitative research, some historical precedent exists for viewing a theory as a scientific prediction or explanation. For example, Kerlinger's year 1979 definitions of a theory is valid today. He said a theory is a set of interrelated constructs or variables, definitions, and propositions that presents a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relationships among variables. Also, a theory might appear in a research study as an argument, discussion, or rationale, and it helps to explain or predict phenomena that occur in the world. Let's proceed to the 3 levels of theories. The 3 levels of those theories are named by macro, meso, micro level. Macro level is society as a whole, political, economic, social factors. Also, meso level is a part of a society, groups, organizations. Micro actions of individuals. Micro level theories provide explanations limited to small slices of time, space, or numbers of people, such Goffman's theory of phrase work, which explains how people engage in ritual during face-to-face interactions. Then, meso-level theories link the micro and macro levels. These theories are of organization, social movement, or communities. And also, the macro level theory explain the larger aggregates. Such as social institutions. For example, explain how the amount of surplus a society produces increase with the development of the society. These are the examples. This is the examples of macro level. These theories are found in the social science disciplines of psychology, sociology, anthropology, education, and economics, as well as within many subfields. Forms of theories. Researchers state their theories in a research proposal in several ways, such as series of hypotheses, then logic statements, or visual models. First, some researchers state theories in the form of interconnected hypotheses. For example, Hopkins, near 1964, conveyed his theory of influence processes as a series of 15 hypotheses. Some of the hypotheses are as follows. 1. is the higher one's rank, the greater one's centrality. 2. The greater one's centrality, the greater one's observability. The higher one's rank, the greater one's observability. Here's an example of logic statements. A second way is to state a theory as a series of if-then statements that explain why one would expect the dependent variables to influence or cause the dependent variables. If the frequency of interactions between two or more persons increases, the degree of their liking for one another will increase. Third, an author may present a theory as a visual model. This is a visual model statement. It's useful to translate variables into visual picture. This proceeds into the three independent variables influence a single dependent variables mediated by two intervening variables. There is an example of the three independent variables. Position the dependent variables on the right in the diagram and dependent variables on the left. Use one-way arrows leading from each determining variables to each variable dependent on it. We can use arrows. Indicate the strength of the relationship among variables by inserting valence signs on the paths. Use positive or negative valences that postulate or infer relationships. Use two-headed arrows connected to show and analyze relationships between variables that depend upon other relationships in the model. More complicated causal diagrams can be constructed with additional notations. This one portrays basic model of limited variables, such as typically found in survey-based research study. So, a variation on this theme is to have independent variables in which control and experimental groups are compared on one independent variable in terms of an outcome. Dependent variable. As shown in a figure 3.2, two groups on variable x are compared in terms of their influence on y. The dependent variable design is between groups experimental design. These two modeled only to introduce possibilities for connecting independent and dependent variables to build theories. More complicated designs employ multiple independent and dependent variables in elaborate models of causations. For example, John Neckel, 1990, in a doctoral dissertations and proposal research, productivity among faculty in pharmacy schools, presented a complex visual model, shown in a figure 3.3. John Neckel asked what factors influence a faculty member's scholarly research performance. After identifying these factors in the literature, he adopted a theoretical framework found in nursing research and developed a visual model portraying the relationship among these factors. Also, he listed the dependent variables on the far left, the interviewing variables in the middle, and the dependent variables on the right. The direction of influence flowed from the left to the right, and he used plus and minus signs to indicate hypothesis directions. Here are the two groups with different treatments on X are compared in terms of Y. The deductive approach typically used in qualitative research. This deductive approach to research in the quantitative approach has implications for the placement of a theory in a quantitative research study. A general guide is to introduce the theory early in a plan or study. In the introduction, in the literature review section, immediately after hypothesis or research questions, as a rationale for the connections among the variables, or in a spreadsheet section of the study. Each placement has its advantages and disadvantages. When we take a study, research study, We use they have a research step. This is I write the theory into a separate section in a research proposal so that readers can clearly identify the theory from other components, such as passage provides a complete explications of the theory sections, its use, and how it relates to the study. Writing a quantitative theoretical perspective. When you're writing your manuscript or your proposal, you want to look to the literatures. Of course, you will start due to interview review to examine a literatures in a specific discipline and find wherever the studies and they're related to your topic on the other neighboring topics. So, it's possible that the theory has an applicable time to make specific topic, which means that a great place to be conducted. So, you might find explications of the theory in specific area, or you may not in a neighboring areas to make a study and to make a report support of your study. When you ask the questions in a previous dependent and dependent variables based on the theory, and in you will write that you are going to name the theory, you are going to write the theory when originated, who are the author, talk about the theory, and also identify the topics where one finds the theory being applied. You were going to identify the propositions or hypotheses in the theory and state your independent and dependent variables, and of course don't forget to write your rationale of your theory. Let's proceed into a theoretical perspective. Theoretical perspective studying the scholarly productivity of faculty. Social learning provides theoretical framework. This example of theoretical framework is cognitive behavioral environment determinants. Social learning theory. There are the principles of this. Words, competitiveness, aggressiveness, sex roles, deviance, pathological behavior. A quantitative theory section. Creutzfeldt near 1986 wrote a doctoral dissertation titled Locus of Control, Interpersonal Trust and Scholarly Productivity. There are examples of theoretical perspective. Theory she planned to use. The central hypothesis of the theory, information about who has used the theory and its applicability, and an adaptations of the theory to variables in her study using if-then logic. These are the examples of or ways to make theoretical perspective. Expectancy within the formula refers the perceived degree of certainty or probability that a causal relationship generally exists between behavior and rewards. This construct of generalized expectancy has been defined as internal locus of control when an individual believes that reinforcements are a function of specific behavior, or as external locus of control when the effects are attributed to luck, fate, or powerful others. The perceptions of causal relationships need not be absolute positions, but rather tend to vary in degree along a continuum depending upon previous experience and situational complexities. In the applications of social learning theory to the study of scholarly productivity, there are the four classes of variables that we define. One is the scholarly productivity is the desired behavior or activity. Second, locus of control is the generalized expectancy that rewards are not dependent upon specific behaviors. Third is reinforcement. Reinforcement are the rewards from scholarly work and the value attached to these rewards. And lastly, the educational institutions is the psychological situations which furnishes many of the rewards for scholarly productivity. With these variables, the formula for behavior which was developed would be adapted to read. The potential of scholarly behavior to occur within educational institutions is a function of the expectancy that this activity will lead to specific rewards of the value that the faculty member places of these rewards. Also, the interactions of interpersonal trust with locus of control must be considered in relationship to the expectancy of attaining rewards through behaviors as recommended in subsequent statements. Finally, certain characteristics such as educational preparations, chronological age, postdoctoral fellowships, tenure or full-time versus part-time employment be associated with the scholarly productivity of nurse faculty in a manner similar to that seen within other disciplines. There are the following statements that represents the underlying logic for designing and conducting the study. These statements represent the locus of control. Their efforts and actions in producing scholarly works will lead to rewards. This is an locus of controls. Others can be relied upon to follow through on their promises. This is an interpersonal trust. The rewards for scholarly activity are worthwhile. These represent statements that reward values. The rewards are available with their discipline or institutions. Also, these statements represent the institutional setting. Then they will attain high levels of scholarly productivity. Types of theories used in qualitative research. Qualitative, it is used as a broad explanations for behavior and attitudes, and it may be complete with variables, constructs, and hypotheses. Although researchers might not refer to them as theories, they provide explanations that anthropologists use to study the culture, sharing, behavior, and attitudes of people. Second, researchers increasingly use a theoretical lens or perspective, which provides an overall orienting lens for the studies of questions of gender, class, and race, or other issues or marginalized groups. This lens becomes an advocacy perspective that shapes the types of questions asked, informs how data are collected and analyzed, and also provides a call or action change. Qualitative research underwent a transformation to broaden its scope of inquiry to include this theoretical lens. They guide the researchers as to what issues are important to examine and people that need to be studied. In his critical ethnography studies, researchers begin with a theory that informs their studies. This causal theory might be one of emancipations or repressions. It is available to researchers in qualitative theoretical perspectives. Some of these as feminist perspectives, racialized discourses, theoretical theory, care theory, disability inquiry. Also, feminist is viewed as a problematic women's diverse situations and the institutions that frame those situations. Research topics may include policy issues related to realizing social justice or mean in specific contexts or knowledge about oppressive situations for women. Racialized discourses. It is a raise important questions about the control and productions of knowledge, particularly about people and communities of colors. Critical theory perspectives are concerned with empowering human beings to transcend the constraints placed on them by race, class, and gender. Care theory, a term used in this literature, focuses on individuals calling themselves lesbians, gays, bisexuals, or transgender people. The researchers using this approach does not objectivity the individuals is concerned with cultural and political means and conveys the voices and experience of individuals who have been suppressed. Feminist in Filipino or Filipino language is pambabae, and also racialized in Filipino language is magpalaki-lahi. And also the critical theory in Filipino language is mapananganib. Care theory in Filipino language is mahiyain. Also, disability inquiry. Disability is kapansanan. Disability addresses the meaning of inclusions in schools and encompasses administrators, teachers, and parents who have children with disabilities. As the 20th century draws to a close, traditional social science has come under increasing scrutiny and attack as those exposing critical and postmodern perspective challenges objectivities, assumptions, and regional norms for the conduct research. Third, it is distinct from these theoretical orientations are qualitatively studies in which theories or some broad explanations becomes the end of point. It is an inductive process of building from data broad terms or generalized model or theory. The researchers begins by gathering detailed information from participants and then forms these informations into categories or themes. These terms are developed into broad patterns, theories, or generalizations that are then compared with personal experiences or with existing literatures on the topic. So, the development of themes and categories into patterns, theories, or generalizations suggests varied endpoint for qualitative studies, to which is added the researchers' own personal experiences, called naturalistic generalizations. So, another example is grounded theory provides a different endpoint. So, inquirers hope to discover a theory that is grounded in information from participants. So, refer to pattern theories as the explanations that develop during naturalistic or qualitative research, rather than the deductive form found in the qualitative studies. These pattern theories or generalizations represent interconnected thoughts or parts linked to a whole. Next is pattern theory doesn't emphasize logical deductive reasoning. It contains an interconnected set of concepts and relationships, but it does not require causal statements. Instead, pattern theory uses metaphor or analogies so that the relationship makes sense. And also, pattern theories are systems of ideas that inform. So, finally, some qualitative studies do not employ any explicit theory. Still, one sees qualitative studies that contain no explicit theoretical orientation, such as in phenomenology, in which inquirers attempt to build the existence of experience from participants. In these studies, the inquirer constructs a rich, detailed descriptions of a central phenomenon. These are my research steps for the theory use and proposal. First, decide if theory is to be used in qualitative proposal. Second, if it is used, then identify how the theory will be used in the study, and just as an upfront explanations, as an endpoint, or as an advocacy lens. Third, is allocate the theory in the proposal in manner consistent with its use. These are the research steps. Let's proceed into locating in qualitative research. Theory is used affects in its placement in a qualitative study. In those studies with a cultural theme or theoretical lens, the theory occurs in the opening passage of the study. Consistent with the emerging design of qualitative inquiry, the theory may appear at the beginning and be modified or adjusted based on participant views. Even in the most theory-oriented qualitative design, such as critical ethnography, justifies the use of theory. Building empirical grounded theory requires reciprocal relationship between data and theory. Data must be allowed to generate propositions in dialectical manner that permits use of a priori theoretical frameworks, but which give a particular framework by becoming the container into which data must be poured. So, when we use a theory, we need to locate the theory when we make a research study. Be sure to locate the theory in qualitative research. There is an importance of the research study. A theory early in a quantitative study. They felt the model had been incompletely conceptualized and, as a consequence, only imprecisely understood and measured. Those model was not being tested as one would find in a quantitative project, but modified at the end of the study. The authors defined the Intox model and advanced the modifications that describe how ethnicity functions. This theory might be represented as a logic diagram, a visual representation of relationship among concepts. The theory at the end of a qualitative study. The theory sections came into the article as the last sections. We represented a visual model of the theory, developed inductively from categories of information supplied by interviewers. Also, in addition, we also advanced directional hypotheses that logically followed from the model. Moreover, in the sections on the model and the hypothesis, we compared the results from participants with results from other studies and theoretical speculations in literature. For example, we stated we can use these words into a theory at the end of the qualitative study. So, these positions and its sub-positions represent unusual, even contrary evidence to our expectations. As this example shows, we develop a visual model that interrelated variables. Derive this model inductively from informant comments and place the model at the end of the study, where the central proportions it could contrast and existing theories. Also, lastly, is mixed methods theory use. Theory use in mixed methods studies may include theory deductively in quantitative theory testing and verifications, or inductively as in an emerging qualitative theory or pattern. A social science or health science theory may be used as a framework to be tested in either a quantitative or qualitative approach to inquiry. So, also, another way to think about theory in mixed methods research is a theoretical lens or perspective is to guide the study. Studies are beginning to emerge that employ mixed methods, design using a lens to study gender, race, or ethnicity, disability, sexual orientations, and other bases of diversity. Also, they identified the use of transformative design as a distinct form of mixed methods research. This design gives primacy to value-based, action-oriented research such as in participatory actions research and empowerment approaches. The use of the diverse methods and a focus on action solutions. The implementations of these ideas in the implementation of these ideas in the practice of mixed methods research has now been carried forward by the authors. The more information on procedures has offered in a chapter written by Criswell, Planner, Clark, Gottman, and Hanson. They identified the use of theoretical perspective such as gendered, feminist, cultural, racial, ethnic, lifestyle, critical, and class and social status. This perspective became an overlay over mixed methods designs. They further developed visual models to portray how this lens might provide a guiding perspective for mixed method study. So, Box 3.1 Transformative Inspiratory Questions for Mixed Methods Researchers throughout research process. Here are the questions of our mixed methods researchers. Defining the problem and searching the literatures. Identifying the research design. Identifying the data sources and selecting participants. Identifying or constructing data collection instruments and methods. Analyzing, interpreting, and reporting and using results. There are the questions. As an outline in box 3.1, she advocates for the importance of a theory lens in mixed method research, in detailing of transformative emancipatory paradigm and specific procedures. She emphasized the role that values played in studying feminist, ethnic, racial, and disability issues. Her transformative theory was an umbrella term of research that was emancipatory, anti-discriminatory, participative, Freirean, feminist, racial, ethnic, for individuals with disabilities, and for all marginalized groups. Mertens identifies the implications of these transformative theories for mixed methods research. This involves integrations of the transformative emancipatory methodology into all phases of the research process. Reading through the questions in box 3.1, one gains a sense of the importance of studying issues of discriminations and oppressions and of recognizing diversity among study participants. Also, these questions also address treating individuals respectfully through gathering and communicating data collections and through reporting results that lead to change in social processes and relationships. And also, this is my summary of our report about the use of theory, chapter 3 by John Criswell. And also, these are the references of our topic.